In life, we rarely get clean conclusions. Oftentimes knowing is hard enough, and the process of finding out even harder, but sometimes not knowing is the hardest. The narrative of one's life isn't a narrative, at least not until we filter it through our own traditions and personal lenses, making them easier to digest and integrate into our experiences, our survival mechanisms. But there are some things that your brain can't even try to connect the dots between, either because the associated trauma is too great, or hopefully more often, but sometimes equally as troubling, because you simply don't have enough information. Where did you lose that pair of sneakers? Whatever happened to that online friend you fell out of touch with when you were 13? When your childhood pet ran away, where did they end up? I'm thinking of a lot of darker examples that are too personal to share in a video like this, and you might be as well. Maybe you tried figuring out how or why it happened only to come up against dead ends. Maybe there were no leads to begin with. The stuff, it can really keep you up at night. Block out your thoughts, like a giant question mark. I give you Mario Penis, a hideous trio of Mario mysteries. I've pondered these questions basically my whole life, and now you will too. I live in hell, and you're invited. I was a weird teenager and a weirder adult. I was definitely into Nintendo and Mario as a kid through typical channels like Friends Game Consoles and Nintendo Power magazines, but I was only able to get deep in the paint once my internet access really blossomed around 10 or 11. It wasn't unrestricted, mind you, but researching Mario facts like a frothing lunatic was seen as child-friendly enough for my parents to let slide. I have a sizable tenure in the business of Mario knowing. God, the president, made my middle name Mario Knower. No, I'm not going to show you my birth certificate. I grew up on various Mario-adjacent database-type websites. I started out on smbhq.com, a now-dead, pre-Wikipedia Mario archiving service and fan site ran by a couple of people with web design to match. I frequented the neglected character sprite comics, in which a few of the site makers would Frankenstein sprites of obscure Mario enemies into MS Paint comics. I felt like a hipster for knowing who they were, and that made me feel big. Then the extremely well-kept Mario Wiki popped up, and I was a frequent lurker and attempted contributor, which the administration did not like. Apparently adding your highly educated, not at all baseless headcanons to articles was violating some sort of policy, but actually I wasn't the only one who wanted to use wiki articles as an artistic medium, which led to the creation of Fantendo, a Wikia, now fandom.com, site for fake video game wiki articles. It started out as weird Nintendo fanfiction and spun into crossovers from all intellectual property spheres, and even a bunch of wholly original content. This is basically where I grew up. It was sort of like DeviantArt, but for even more autistic trans children, and relatively sequestered from internet trolls and spam artists. This place is another video or several in and of itself. The point is that I'm very smart, and my superior levels of Mario liking gets me a lot of dates. Sometimes the questions most worth asking are the ones without clear answers. Some conspiracies are worth peddling. The first question we need to ask is, was Mario ever meant to have meaningful consistency in his canon? Or is it more like the 1920s rubber hose cartoons that inspired them? Just a playground for ideas, only with enough story that is necessary to make a good video game? The answer is, almost certainly, but I don't care. I love to take things too seriously. Nothing bad ever happened from someone taking video games too seriously. Alright, mystery number 1. Mario is the most recognizable guy in gaming. But did you know that there's actually some controversy over who he even is? Super Smash Bros. Is a whole other can of worms whose very premise involves multiple versions of characters fighting each other. But entirely distinct character slots aren't usually reserved for the same guy, even if it's Link. See, Link, Young Link, and Toon Link are different guys from throughout time. But if Dr. Mario and Mario are the same person, look, I know I shouldn't editorialize, I should just ask the questions, but first of all, where does he find the time to practice medicine? He's too busy having adventures and playing a variety of professional sports, but none of those activities has produced a distinct entity, except for Dr. Mario. So what if Dr. Mario is a different guy? Perhaps even the third Mario brother. I do want to debunk some misinformation real quick. In 2017 Super Mario Odyssey, Mario was seen shirtless in an official capacity for the first time. And in addition to lacking the body hair trademarked to any true Italian, he also appeared to lack a belly button. When probed, producer Yoshiiki Koizumi. Hey, Editing Tucker here. I realized that I missaid his name. It is Yoshiaki Koizumi. I apologize to him. If he's watching this, probably not, but you know. gave a series of cryptic non-answers, which really seemed like dodging the question. Perhaps Dr. Mario created regular Mario as a test tube clone to live the adventurous life he couldn't while practicing medicine. This would hold some water if not for one crucial piece of Mario's backstory, one of the few we actually know for certain. In Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo, baby Mario and Luigi were delivered by a stork. This may be how all birth works in the Mario universe for all we know, but by this logic, nobody has belly buttons, except for some piranha plants sometimes, which is weird because they seem to reproduce using spores, but maybe belly buttons serve a different purpose for them? See, we're already butting against unanswerable questions, and we haven't even surpassed number 1 yet. For the sake of our collective mental health, let's move on. Our second mystery requires some preamble, which I promise is going somewhere. So, they used to do this thing at the Nintendo store in New York City where they'd have Charles Martinet, Mario's pre-Chris Pratt era voice actor, basically sit in a box with a screen on it and talk to people as Mario. It worked a bit like the Turtle Talk with Crush thing at California Adventure at Disneyland, but like way less sophisticated. But the point is, in this video from 2017, someone asked Mario why Waluigi isn't in a lot of games, and he said he'd have to ask his papa, that being Shigeru Miyamoto, Mario's original creator. You may have heard of the Koopalings, Bowser's quirky children who are all named after famous musicians. They were introduced in Mario 3. Later, another child, Bowser Jr., was introduced in Mario Sunshine, an 8th sibling, we all assumed, but we assumed wrong. Miyamoto later said that the original 7 Koopalings aren't biologically related to Bowser at all, which is strange. Child slavery or adoption? What's the difference, am I right? I have my own theories, of course, but those don't matter now, for you see, in a 2015 YouTube video on the official Nintendo channel called Mario Myths with Miyamoto, this question was posed to Mario's papa. Contradicting his previous not knowing who the mother was at all, Miyamoto nodded sagely, and do you know what this vector of chaos said next? The motherfucker pointed at himself. Listen, folks, I'm just stating the facts. Bowser Jr. is the third Mario brother. That's no mystery. The real mystery is how. Is it more in spirit, like a more normal person would assume? Or is it biological? Should I be prying into Bowser's sex life like this? Or are there religious implications? The world may never know. More questions than answers, as always with the Mario series. Our final mystery transcends time itself and has dark implications for our previous mysteries. We all remember Rosalina, the freaky space mommy introduced in Super Mario Galaxy. She possesses a celestial magic that, with the help of a few dozen power stars, destroys and remakes the entire universe at the end of Mario Galaxy. Where could this power have come from? In Mario Galaxy 1, there's this amazing, fully illustrated storybook you unlock chapter by chapter throughout the game. Rosalina tells the story of how she ended up in space with the Lumas. Basically, when she was a little girl, a Luma spaceship landed on her planet, which is implied to be Mario's Earth, but it's kept a little open, and asked for help finding his mama. In space, she meets a bunch of other Lumas and eventually decides to become their mother figure for like the rest of time. It's sort of implied that all her time in space has made her magical, as she appears to be a pretty normal human girl for most of the story, although probably a princess, but that's another conspiracy. Later in the story, it's revealed that Rosalina has recently lost her mother and possibly her father and brother as well, and uses helping Lumas as a distraction from her grief. It's really sad and beautiful. The director of Mario Galaxy 1 integrated this totally optional thing into the game pretty late in development. Apparently he did it alone at night and sort of behind Miyamoto's back. Ah yes, Miyamoto, Mario's father, Bowser Jr.'s mother, and the person who was basically the final say on all things Nintendo. In this 2009 interview with Wired, he explains a philosophy he would carry into the Mario games to this day, that in his opinion, Mario games don't need heavy plots. This echoes that thing I said about Mario games being more like classic cartoons than some modern serialized ones back at the beginning. It makes a lot of sense. Personally, I prefer medium plot-heavy games, but that's just me. My point here isn't about my own taste. It's that it's clear that even over a decade ago, there are differences in taste at Nintendo internally, and occasionally this creates conflicts of interest. Paradoxes, one could say. Miyamoto even cited Koizumi in this interview, no doubt referring to the situation in which Koizumi kinda slid Rosalina's storybook into Galaxy 1. Then, in Mario Kart 8, they introduced baby Rosalina. Temporally speaking, she should not exist in this form. It's not even that a person living on Mario's Earth wouldn't have star motifs in their outfit or whatever, but she's also shown as having that wand, something she doesn't get until she's an adult, at least in a capacity that we can confirm. And she's also seen floating and using magic, and she didn't become magic until she went to space. Again, at least not in a capacity that we can confirm. See, this is the blessing and the curse of giving Mario continuity. The main cast has baby forms and adult forms, forms, but we never really see anything in between, except for Rosalina. She's not as pliable as the others. You can't just Muppet Babiesify a person who's had an even slightly fuller canonical life than your average cartoon plumber. But they did it anyway. They defied the already flimsy canon they had established only like 7 years earlier so that they could fill a character slot with a cheap babyfied doppelganger. Why would they do this? The answer is something we've touched on this whole time, but avoided like stubborn fools. I said it from the start. The answer is the question. The Mario world is somehow both very fleshed out and totally inconsistent. In the past decade or two, its branding has become more consistent and homogenized, and we see it like that now. The branding works. You don't usually get to choose what does and doesn't keep you up at night, but I think in this case, if I look at it differently, I can make it easier on myself, and maybe you, too. My first and most egregious mistake was looking at the Mario world like a real place. It's always looked and functioned different from game to game. Really, it's just whatever Nintendo needs it to be in the moment, with just enough consistencies to suspend the average person's disbelief. What Nintendo doesn't know is that I'm not the average person. I'm mentally ill. I grew up thumbing through lists of obscure Mario enemies on the internet. Is that something a well-adjusted person would do? But I don't blame it entirely on my neurodivergence. I think my hyperfixating on it is because Nintendo itself is conflicted on whether or not they want a consistent world and plots over pure gameplay. There's been a tug-of-war for years. Nowhere does this feel more apparent than in the various Mario RPGs. These games were all outsourced to second-party companies, which basically means they got the IP but slightly less Nintendo oversight. If you look at the Paper Mario games in particular, you can see how Nintendo's plot-light mentality finally caught up to them. Over the years, diminishing returns on original characters and locations has created a modern Paper Mario that's trying to be like the older games with more story, but it just isn't being given room to. They're games in conflict with themselves, a world in conflict with itself. The Mario games are games in their purest forms, sandboxes of play. Like I said, they're whatever Nintendo needs them to be at the time. But imagine if that world actually existed. Sometimes it feels like it does when you get sucked into a story. But isn't it sort of a horrifying cruelty to make a sandbox that is constantly reckoning with itself, even if it only exists to make people happy? What if it served another purpose? I can't assume what was going through the heads of anyone making the Mario RPGs, or any Mario game for that matter, but I think it's clear that some people see the Mario world as the sandbox we've described, a flexible enough but ultimately utilitarian set of tools you can use to make a fun video game in the style and spirit of previous fun video games in the same series. And some people see it as an opportunity to do that while also telling a more traditional narrative. And I'm not saying either one of these methodologies are more valid than the other. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. Super Mario for the NES having less of a traditional plot than Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door doesn't make one objectively superior to the other, and it's good that both exist. Both deserve to exist. In that particular case, Thousand Year Door can only exist with its huge deepening of the Mario world and lore because the original game and Donkey Kong before it established a threadbare but present narrative and cast of characters to build on. But doesn't a game like Pong, purely mechanical, entirely in the abstract without making quite a few interpretive leaps and bounds, deserve to exist alongside games like Control or Firewatch or Disco Elysium? If you think no, I think that's just a matter of taste and not something you actually intrinsically believe. So if it's taste, then you can seek what suits you elsewhere. Perhaps even you can make your own. And like any YouTube video essayist worth their stuff, I'm about to shoehorn something about capitalism into this, so get ready. If the market was as free as capitalists would prefer you to believe, you'd be able to make your own narrative-dependent Disco Elysium-style Mario RPG, and even profit from it on the same merit as Nintendo's own stuff, regardless of what approach they chose to take with their stories, or lack thereof. As someone who grew up writing Mario fanfiction, you could imagine I think about those possibilities a lot. Do you? Genuine question. Sound off in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this weird video. I'm still figuring out how to weasel my thoughts into this medium, and I hope the attempts so far have been at least somewhat coherent. I'm sure I'll talk more about Mario here in the future, and if you want more already, you can check out my Twitter, but I actually dabbled in the realm of Mario lore consistencies are kind of up to the individual to decide before now, in the form of the People's Mario. It's a Google Forms poll with a preamble where I've created the space to create a consistent Mario canon by way of democratic vote. It's a living document, and I'm always open to suggestions, posing new questions, and whatever other frothing at the mouth Mario and Nintendo conspiracies you want to shoot at me in the numerous write in sections of the pole. It was always going to be unwieldy if I was the one writing it, but still, I think how unwieldy it is actually gives credence to the point of this video. But again, feel free to sound off there and in the comments if I missed something. My middle name may be Mario Knower, but there's definitely stuff I missed. Many of my other Fantendo friends know way more about Mario than me, and I'm sure they're not the only ones. If those questions about copyright I posed at the end piqued your interest, I made a cartoon last year that comes to a similar conclusion that you can watch here. If you want to see me attempting to do what is essentially video game fanfiction in the modern day, I did this silly video about my idea for the forthcoming Pac-Man live-action movie. I make comics, I make cartoons, I do a bunch of other weird stuff that you can find elsewhere on this channel and on tuckerwoolley.com. Thank you so much for being here. So long, Gay Bowser! That was really bad. Those were both really bad. I think I could do better than Chris Pratt, but no, I'm not any better than him. I'm not any better than anyone. Fuck.